Welcome to Reformed Thinking, the show where we take a stack of your sources, articles, research papers, strategic memos, and do the hard work of extracting the most critical insights for you. This is the Deep Dive. Today, we're shifting our focus a bit. We're moving from the immediate frontline reports to the long game, Ukraine's long-term security architecture. The question we're really tackling isn't about how the war is being fought right now, but how future aggression is prevented. Tomorrow.
Right.
And our sources today, they present a really comprehensive strategy. They're calling it the Porcupine-Plus framework.
Yeah, and what's so compelling, at least to me, is how this whole strategic analysis is filtered through the lens of Christian realism.
It is. It connects modern statecraft with doctrines that we talk about all the time, things like stewardship and providence.
It's a fascinating mission for this deep dive. We're looking at a proposed architecture that, well, it has to deliver two things at the same time. First, a denial-focused defense capability at home. That's the porcupine part. And second, a structure of institutionally guaranteed external support. That's the plus.
And the sources are tying these strategic elements directly back to foundational Reformed principles?
They are. The necessity of defense, they argue, it stems from original sin. And the wise use of national resources is guided by the principle of stewardship.
Which brings us to the central strategic challenge here, and it's the core tension the sources identify. It's creating what they call engineered automaticity.
That's the key phrase.
When NATO's Article 5, the Mutual Defense Clause, is off the table, how do you design security guarantees that function with the exact same credibility? They have to be automatic, predictable.
And not subject to shifting political winds.
Exactly. Not subject to a lengthy parliamentary debate when the crisis has already hit.
That credibility really does hinge on the automaticity. Moscow's calculation needs to be simple. If we strike again, what happens next? If the answer is, well, we'll hold a meeting and maybe send some aid in 3 months, deterrence fails. It's gone.
Of course.
But if the answer is predetermined, large-scale, and immediate support is released automatically on pre-authorized rails, then, well, deterrence is hardened.
So it's the difference between an assurance and a guarantee.
A huge difference.
Yeah.
Assurances are often just aspirational statements, solidarity, but guarantees have to be transactional, structured, and legally binding.
Okay, let's unpack the theological ground zero for this whole approach. Why is the state of human nature so critical to military strategy?
Well, the sources, they begin by critiquing what they label secular utopianism.
I've seen that term. This was the dominant idea after the Soviet Union collapsed, right?
It was. This idea that globalism, free markets, deep economic ties, just think of the Nord Stream pipelines, that these things would create such interdependence that a major conflict would just become too economically irrational to even think about.
The worldview being that human behavior can be changed, that rational self-interest will eventually win out over aggressive impulses.
And the source material calls that assumption not just, politically naive, but a theological miscalculation.
An anthropological heresy is the term they use.
It is. It sounds like they're saying you just can't build a security policy on the expectation that humans will eventually become perfect.
That's the heart of it. The source argues this utopian view completely denies the absolute reality of original sin, which you can trace right back to Genesis chapter 3.
And the doctrine of total depravity, which is referenced in Ephesians 2.1.
Which doesn't mean man is as bad as he could be.
No, not at all. But it means that every part of human nature, including our reason and our political will, is fundamentally corrupted. So aggression, self-interest, the lust for domination. These aren't random bugs in the system.
They're the default setting.
They are the gravity of a fallen world.
So, if that's the underlying human condition, this ongoing corruption and self-interest, then a secure peace can't possibly rely on paper treaties or economic incentives by themselves.
No.
And this links directly to the duty of the state, what we call the divine ordination of the magistrate.
Correct. If mankind is inherently prone to lawlessness, the state's primary duty isn't what a utopian might argue, pursuing a borderless global brotherhood. It's much more severe.
It's about restraining evil.
That's it. Romans 13.4 is the anchor here. The magistrate is ordained by God to bear the sword as a minister of justice, a terror to evil works.
The state, then, is a necessary God-ordained countermeasure against the effects of the fall.
Precisely. And the sources cite the Westminster Confession of Faith, Chapter 23, Section 2, which states that magistrates may lawfully wage war upon just and necessary occasion.
So, under this framework, neglecting defense isn't just a strategic failure.
It's a moral failure. It's a dereliction of the duty God has given you to restrain chaos and protect the innocent. You're effectively handing the innocent over to the aggressor because you failed to bear the sword properly.
Let's sum up this initial theological premise, then. True peace isn't found in hopeful promises or economic dependency.
Not at all.
It's found in the credible strength needed to restrain the tyranny that always lurks just beneath the surface of international relations. And so Ukraine must embrace Christian realism.
Which means credible deterrence. It requires a defense so robust that it completely changes the aggressor's cost-benefit calculus.
They have to see the cost before they even think about striking.
The defense must force the aggressor to calculate an unbearable price for injustice before they strike. Weakness in this fallen world is always an invitation to exploitation. Strength is the only language recognized by the aggressor's corrupted will.
That sets the stage perfectly for the next part, the strategic setting. We have to analyze the threat model. It's not enough to just say Russia is a threat.
No, you have to get specific.
We need to understand how Russia expects to succeed if it tries again, because any deterrent has to shut down those specific paths.
The source material focuses very heavily on the aggressor's mindset. Russia's goal, they argue, isn't merely territorial.
No.
It's geopolitical and symbolic. They want to ensure Ukraine remains strategically constrained, unable to fully consolidate any Western alignment, and certainly unable to rebuild decisive military or economic strength.
So, for Moscow, success is anything that preserves its leverage.
Yes. Coercion, destabilization, or just the sustained threat of renewed conflict. That's a win for them.
So even if there's a pause in the fighting, Russia has to believe it can restart the conflict on terms that are favorable to them.
And the security architecture has to foreclose those options. Let's break down the 4 specific pathways the sources detail.
Okay, what's the first one?
The first pathway Russia might attempt is what they call speed and shock, a rapid thrust.
Okay, so a sudden, concentrated offensive.
It's exactly. Or a massive escalation designed to overwhelm key defenses very, very quickly. The strategic logic is simple. Paralysis.
Paralyze the leadership. Paralyze the response.
If Ukraine's command structure is fractured, if its air defenses are blinded, and key cities are immediately under threat, the strategic debate in Western capitals shifts immediately.
That's the gambit. You force the West to move from debating how do we help Ukraine win to how do we stop this from spiraling into a wider war.
That's it. The attacker gambles that the sheer speed of their advance will create a new reality on the ground that forces political concessions.
So to counter this, the deterrent has to deny them that ability to create quick, irreversible facts.
The porcupine has to be able to absorb that initial shock and maintain command authority.
That makes sense. Okay, the second pathway is the attrition and endurance model. This is the long, grinding campaign that we've seen elements of already.
Yes. And this campaign, it bets on the linear depletion of resources. Russia calculates that materials, ammunition stocks, air defense interceptors, spare parts, trained manpower,
All of that will become a critical bottleneck for Ukraine faster than it does for Russia.
Right. The strategic purpose here is exhaustion. It's making the war feel permanent and economically draining.
So they try to turn time into a weapon. They repeatedly strike logistics nodes, industry, population centers.
Hoping that domestic fatigue in Ukraine, and crucially, political fatigue among partner nations, will force Ukraine to the negotiating table.
From a position of weakness.
The deterrent architecture has to defeat this by showing that Ukraine's logistical tail is deeper and more resilient than Moscow's. It has to project inexhaustibility.
Okay, pathway 3 is less conventional. This is political warfare and hybrid operations.
And this is about fracturing the decision-making process.
Russia's an expert at this.
They are. In a post-ceasefire setting or a period of fragile calm, they can use influence operations, deep cyber-sabotage, corruption networks, targeted disinformation, all to great effect.
The goal being to fracture decision-making, delegitimize the leadership in Kyiv.
And cultivate a narrative in partner countries that Western support is futile because Ukraine is inherently unstable or corrupt.
So attacks on governance are just as strategic as attacks on military bases.
Every bit. This means deterrence has to be more than just hardware. It requires resilience of governance and information integrity.
And these are gray zone moves, right? They fall below the threshold of a clear conventional attack.
Correct. They hope to avoid triggering any of those automatic countermeasures we talked about.
And finally, pathway 4, coercion through infrastructure.
This one targets the economic heart of the nation. It blends limited conventional moves, like maritime harassment against Black Sea ports, with intense missile and drone campaigns against energy infrastructure,
Seasonal warfare.
oftentimes to the deepest parts of winter, designed to strangle economic recovery and revenue.
And if the economy can't recover, investment dries up, and the state's ability to pay for its own defense effort eventually collapses.
It creates a self-fulfilling prophecy where instability erodes military readiness and social cohesion at the same time.
Okay, so to summarize the challenge, a credible deterrent has to deny Russia 4 expectations: quick victory through shock,
Material outlasting through attrition,
internal and external fracturing via political warfare.
and gaining concessions through limited coercive measures. The defense system has to be layered and resilient enough to shut down all 4 of those routes at the same time.
Which brings us to the core denial strategy, the porcupine. And this is where that concept of stewardship becomes the guiding theological principle for military resource allocation.
Right. The Porcupine strategy defines asymmetric deterrence by denial. And the central insight is simple. Ukraine does not need to match Russia tank for tank or plane for plane.
That would be poor strategy and poor stewardship.
Exactly. Instead, the focus is on making conquest unlikely and, just as important, making occupation prohibitively costly.
And the sources connect this directly to stewardship, referencing the parable of the talents in Matthew 25. So what does wise stewardship of defense resources actually look like in practice?
It means using your limited resources in the most effective way possible to protect the innocent. This necessarily condemns spending vast sums on what the sources call prestige weaponry.
Systems that look impressive on a parade ground but don't secure peace on the battlefield.
It's a call for efficiency and lethality over grandiosity.
This brings to mind the analogy of David and Goliath from 1 Samuel 17. It's really the perfect precedent for this kind of asymmetric warfare.
It is. David recognized that Saul's heavy bronze armor, the conventional equipment of the day, was completely unsuited for the task. It was poor stewardship to rely on weapons designed for a different kind of fight.
So he chose agility. He chose standoff weapons, the sling, which neutralized Goliath's superior size and weight before he could even close the distance.
And for Ukraine, attempting a symmetrical war, buying thousands of expensive systems to match Russia's stocks, would be fiscally irresponsible and strategically suicidal.
The David strategy. It dictates using precision, mobility, and cost-effective lethality to inflict disproportionate pain.
And this asymmetric focus translates into 5 necessary operational elements of denial that have to be built and sustained.
Let's walk through those. What's the first one?
The first is survivability and dispersion. The guiding logic here is preventing paralysis on day 1. If the aggressor launches a surprise attack, command and control, C2 must survive and function.
So you need redundant communications, mobile command posts.
Hardening critical nodes against strikes. If Russia cannot decapitate the leadership or blind the air defense, the strategic effect of their initial shock attack is neutralized.
No single point of failure.
Correct. The second is asymmetric lethality. This is a core technology of the Porcupine. We're talking about systems that impose highly unfavorable cost exchanges.
Drones, loitering munitions.
Advanced anti-armor systems, vast numbers of unmanned aerial systems, and long-range precision fires aimed specifically at logistics and staging areas. The goal isn't necessarily holding ground.
It's attrition and paralysis.
Forcing the attacker to halt, expose themselves, and just bleed through repeated small losses that accumulate into an operational collapse.
The third element is deterrence infrastructure. And air defense is absolutely paramount here.
Yes, but not for achieving perfect protection. It's for continuity of governance.
Okay.
Layered air and missile defenses must protect critical nodes. Major cities, rail junctions, energy production, and critically, the industrial facilities needed for sustainment. This stops Russia from using terror and infrastructure collapse as a substitute for an actual battlefield victory.
The state has to be able to function even under attack.
Right. The fourth element is depth and resilience. This means the defense can't be a thin skin that's easily pierced.
So you need a disciplined, professionalized reserve system.
And a robust territorial defense structure. This depth complicates any occupation scenario. It makes it clear that a temporary breakthrough won't lead to a collapse of resistance. It also allows for the rapid regeneration of combat capability after initial losses.
So the nation can absorb shocks, seal breaches, and keep fighting.
And finally, the fifth element, One that's often overlooked in the heat of battle is sustainment. High-intensity war is industrial.
We've seen that.
Deterrence requires showing Moscow that Ukraine can keep fighting long after the initial emergency shipments are gone. This demands a massive shift from reliance on episodic aid to building a domestic defense industrial ecosystem.
Domestic manufacturing, co-production with partners, dedicated repair capacity.
To ensure replacement rates for high-consumption items, ammo, drones, spare parts year after year, we have to move beyond heroism plus emergency shipments.
Let's focus for a minute on the drone revolution as the prime example of this stewardship principle in action, because the numbers in the sources are just staggering.
They are. The sources highlight that in 2024, Ukrainian manufacturers produced over 1.5 million FPV drones.
1.5 million.
And critically, 96% of the UAVs deployed were from domestic production. This is the very definition of wise resource management.
Well, think about the economics of it. A drone that costs, what, $500 or $1,000, built quickly with commercial parts, is capable of disabling a main battle tank that costs several $1 million.
The cost-exchange ratio is wildly favorable to the defender.
That $500 expense buys the protective value of crippling $1 million asset. That's the porcupine's quill inflicting that disproportionate pain.
And that technological agility, paired with massive scale, directly defeats Russia's attrition strategy, their pathway to. If Russia is losing equipment 5 times faster than Ukraine is using resources to replace them, attrition becomes a losing game for the aggressor.
So the porcupine makes Ukraine extremely difficult to defeat. But as the source material clarifies, difficult isn't enough. Ukraine must be undeniable. And that's the whole reason for the plus component.
Right. Even the toughest denial strategy fails if the porcupine is left to fight until its quills are all gone. The porcupine posture only becomes a credible deterrent when Moscow expects Ukraine will not fight alone.
Which brings us back to engineered automaticity.
Yes, and the sources insist on a very careful distinction here. Security assurances versus security guarantees.
The handshake versus the contract.
Exactly. Assurances are the handshake. They're aspirational statements of solidarity. They lack enforcement mechanisms, resources, or pre-authorized triggers. They're easily renegotiated or just forgotten when pressure mounts.
And a guarantee.
A guarantee is a notarized contract. It's structured, it specifies who does what, under what precise conditions, and critically, it includes mechanisms that make failure to act costly for the guarantors themselves.
This political structure is the key. The sources look toward the Israel model as a structure of political wisdom. And we need to be really clear about the theological framing here.
Absolutely. The sources are strict Christian realists. They reject replacement theology. Ukraine is a Gentile nation under common grace. The model is being adopted purely for prudent statecraft, for political wisdom.
Not for any covenantal identity.
Not at all. We're interested in the mechanism of defense, not the theology of election.
And the mechanism is brilliant in its balance. It prioritizes self-reliance. The porcupine, empowered by external support. The plus.
It delivers a qualitative military edge, a QME, through advanced weapons, intelligence, and finance, crucially, without requiring foreign boots on the ground.
Which ensures sustained capability without triggering the maximal escalatory dynamics of NATO's Article 5.
The goal is codification. The sources advocate for using long-term, binding bilateral or multilateral commitments, memorandums of understanding, or MISOs, security compacts designed to last 10 years or more.
This is applying strategic wisdom like Proverbs 24.6, which stresses the necessity of wise guidance.
It is. It insulates the commitment to defense from the short attention spans and political fatigue that are just inherent in democratic election cycles.
So how do we get from good intentions to those structured pledges? What are the 4 pillars that convert discretionary, unpredictable aid into a guarantee of automaticity?
Pillar 1 is the arms and munitions pledge. We have to eliminate the possibility of a munitions cliff.
This means moving past episodic aid packages
to multi-year procurement contracts, co-production agreements, and guaranteed replenishment schedules. This signals long-term involvement.
If Russia knows that their artillery fire only creates more demand for Western factories, and that the order is already funded and scheduled, they lose the rationale for their attrition strategy.
Precisely. And preposition stocks, where it's logistically feasible, further reduce the operational value of a surprise attack.
Okay, Pillar 2.
Pillar 2 is intelligence and ISR integration. The porcupine's denial is maximized only when it's connected to timely, actionable information.
So you need a standing, secure architecture.
Permanent networks, joint fusion processes, and persistent surveillance support. This reduces Russia's confidence in deception and surprise. The Porcupine's lethality is amplified when its targeting cycles are integrated with partner nation satellites and systems operating routinely, not just during high-crisis moments.
So the instant an aggression is detected, the targeting data is already flowing to the right place.
It needs to operate on autopilot. Pillar 3 focuses on institutionalized training and force generation. This is about organizational stamina.
Wars are ultimately won by the ability to regenerate combat power faster than the enemy can destroy it.
Right. This requires long-term training pipelines, standardized doctrine that promotes interoperability, and professional staff planning development.
So if losses are predictable in high-intensity war, the capacity to replace and retrain skilled personnel must also be predictable.
And if that replacement process is guaranteed, the strategy of grinding Ukraine down becomes irrational.
And the last pillar.
Pillar 4 is financial automaticity. This is essential to counter Russia's pathway. For that coercion through infrastructure and economic strangulation.
Because if the state's finances collapse, the military's endurance collapses from within.
Correct. This pillar demands predictable, multi-year budget support for the government, dedicated emergency stabilization facilities that are triggered by aggression. Say, if a massive missile strike takes out 50% of power generation.
And reconstruction finance that's designed around hardening resilience.
It prevents resistance from collapsing when the aggressor targets the economy. It assures investors and citizens that the state will persist.
So let's define automaticity in concrete terms. The sources talk about a pre-authorized surge bundle. Can you walk us through what that would look like the day aggression resumes?
Okay, so imagine 2 categories of triggers are established. Category A, a low-level gray zone aggression, and Category B, a clear, large-scale conventional aggression, a cross-border invasion or sustained mass missile terror.
The decision gap has to be 0.
Exactly. For a Category B event, the pre-authorized surge bundle means that within, say, 72 hours, predetermined quantities of Patriot interceptors, a specific tonnage of 155mm ammunition, and a specified amount of emergency stabilization funds, say $5 billion, are released automatically.
So the process moves on pre-laid rails. The aid doesn't wait for a political debate in Congress or Parliament.
It ensures that support is not delayed by ad hoc bargaining or legislative deadlock in those critical opening days. The automaticity is structural. It's baked into the security compacts. It treats renewed aggression not as a new crisis requiring negotiation, but as a triggering event for a contractual obligation.
Okay, now we have to turn to the ethical considerations. This denial strategy relies heavily on attrition, and the source material projects that Russia will suffer 1 million casualties by the summer of 2025. That is a stark, horrifying number.
It is a sobering projection, and it requires us to confront the concept of severe mercy, as the source material defines it.
Explain that.
The sources argue that attrition, when waged by a defender against an unjust invader who refuses to cease his violence, is not malice. It's a severe form of justice.
But how is that reconciled with the Christian focus on proportionality and just war theory? That number sounds less like severe mercy and more like engineered slaughter. We have to address that tension.
It's a critical tension. The source's argument rests on the idea that to artificially lower the cost of aggression is a false mercy that only guarantees future wars.
Right.
They cite Proverbs 19.19, cautioning against sparing a person of great wrath, lest you have to deal with their violence again immediately. The high toll is viewed as the tragic weight of the aggressor's persistent sin, returned to him by the sword of the magistrate from Romans 13.4.
So the moral burden for the loss of life rests with the aggressor who chose injustice and invasion.
Not the defender who is simply executing their duty to restrain evil.
I see the logic of restraint requiring proportional strength. But the massive production and deployment of these FPV drones raises a separate moral challenge, this one related to the Imago Dei Genesis 1.27. The sources worry about the gamification of death.
This is a really serious ethical concern. When the soldier engages the enemy through a video feed, often with joystick controls or VR goggles, the experience can resemble a recreational simulation.
A video game.
And this temptation exists to view the adversary as just pixels on a screen, rather than a bearer of the divine image. It risks anesthetizing the conscience to the gravity of taking a human life.
So the moral imperative has to be that a human conscience remains in the loop. The magistrate's authority to bear the sword can't be fully outsourced to silicon.
Precisely. The sources are emphatic about this. A fire-and-forget algorithm cannot exercise moral judgment, it cannot repent, and it can't weigh proportionality in dynamic circumstances. The human operator has to bear the solemn burden of the decision to strike.
The use of force is a duty, a necessary one under Romans 13, but it has to remain a solemn duty requiring human moral input.
Even when you're employing highly advanced asymmetric technology.
Let's turn now to the practical side of maintaining credibility. Deterrence only works if Moscow believes the system is real. How is this achieved through deliberate signaling and transparent metrics?
Credibility requires moving beyond vague slogans. Support, as long as it takes, sounds inspiring, but it invites external testing because it conceals uncertainty about how that support will actually arrive.
So signaling has to be specific.
Very specific. Publicly communicating that reserve mobilization times are decreasing, that air defense production is scaling up, and that further attacks will automatically unlock specific surge deliveries. Mixed messages across partner capitals are a standing invitation for the aggressor to probe for weakness.
And metrics are how we measure reality, not just aspiration. What types of indicators are critical for this system?
We need three crucial categories of indicators. First, readiness indicators that measure capability. The precise time required to mobilize specific reserve units, the output of training pipelines, and the mean time to repair critical equipment after damage.
Okay.
Second, sustainment indicators that measure endurance. These are hard targets for ammunition and interceptor stockpiles, verifiable domestic production volumes, and guaranteed repair cycle times specified in contract.
And the third?
Most critically, for the plus component, are the automaticity indicators. These track the legal and institutional reality of the guarantee. Are pre-positioned inventories secured? Are the agreed-upon response time commitments for surge packages being met during joint exercises? Are multi-year budget lines secured against political suspension?
Deterrence is hardened when both friends and foes can see that the defense system is transparently and structurally becoming harder to break.
And none of this works if confidence erodes due to internal issues like waste or corruption. Verification becomes a strategic tool, not just an accounting requirement.
Right, because that plays right into Russia's Pathway 3, the political warfare.
It does. If Russia believes it can successfully weaponize narratives of corruption to fracture partner support, then corruption becomes an operational vulnerability. Credible oversight is essential for long-term political sustainment. This means transparent procurement, independent audits, and clear enforced consequences for diversion.
Support that can't be sustained politically can't be sustained militarily.
That's the bottom line.
Okay, let's pivot to the unavoidable risks and trade-offs. No strategic blueprint is perfect. The source material addresses several inherent risks in pursuing Porcupine-Plus.
The first one is the frozen conflict dilemma. This is the inherent trade-off of a denial strategy that's built on fortifications and long-term mobilization. It makes a successful offensive unlikely.
But it can also harden boundaries and normalize division. It could make a political resolution more distant.
Exactly. The defense succeeds by stabilizing the lines, which paradoxically means accepting a potentially prolonged state of unresolved conflict. The source acknowledges that the alternative weakness is far worse, as it just invites renewed offensives.
So the strategy prioritizes security for the long term.
Accepting that a political resolution might follow later, not sooner.
Then there's the escalation risk. Critics worry that engineering automaticity looks an awful lot like NATO Light, which could provoke preemption from the aggressor.
That risk is real. But the counterpoint from the sources is that predictability can be stabilizing. Ambiguity and improvisation, on the other hand, are what encourage brinkmanship and miscalculation.
So the automaticity is narrowly focused.
Yes, on denial reinforcing defense and sustainment, not maximal punitive threats or offensive actions. By making the response predictable and defensive, you remove the aggressor's incentive to strike quickly, hoping for uncertainty.
The third major risk is political fatigue and the resource burden among partner nations. Sustained aid is expensive, and democratic patience is often cyclical.
This is why the institutional rails of the plus component are so vital. The strategy deliberately relies on multi-year funding commitments, 10-year compacts, and procurement contracts to counteract domestic political whiplash caused by elections or economic downturns.
But those mechanisms have to be constantly defended at home.
Constantly, arguing that Ukraine's security is inextricably linked to the guarantor's own national interests, not simply charity.
And the persistent issue of governance and corruption remains a threat to the strategy's political viability.
The trade-off here is often speed versus oversight. In a crisis, you need speed. Over time, you need stringent oversight. The sources conclude that the realistic necessity is resilient, governance, transparent procurement, and credible auditing that can withstand political pressure. Without integrity, the political ability to sustain the plus component will erode.
Finally, we have to consider strategic adaptation. Russia won't just sit still. They'll shift from armored thrusts to asymmetric responses, maybe long-range strikes or intensified gray zone probes below the defined triggers.
Which necessitates a layered and flexible design. The strategy needs triggers that cover broad categories of aggression like large-scale missile terror to prevent easy gaming. But it also requires inherent flexibility within the Porcupine to counter novel tactics. The system has to be designed to learn, adapt, and shift its resources quickly, rather than being a fixed, rigid script that can be easily outmaneuvered.
To make this structural and institutional, the sources lay out a phased Porcupine-Plus blueprint. This is the roadmap from improvisation to structural fact. Let's start with the short term, the next 0 to 12 months.
The immediate objective in this phase is closing that decision gap we discussed. It's all about immediate fightability, maximizing layered air defense, accelerating munitions flow with a guaranteed replenishment schedule, hardening command and communications networks, and securing rapid logistics corridors.
The key deliverable here is procedural, right? Demonstrating that the system of automaticity actually works through exercises.
Exactly. When the first missiles land, support has to flow without delay. We move from an emergency request to a pre-authorized surge bundle release. This builds operational confidence in Kyiv, and it signals institutional seriousness to Moscow.
That immediately transitions us into the medium term, the next 1 to 3 years, which shifts from crisis response to durable capacity.
This is the industrialization of denial. The denial posture has to become structural and self-sustaining. This means achieving meaningful scale-up and co-production agreements at domestic manufacturing.
Endurance has to be professionalized.
Yes. Implementing the disciplined reserve model, standardized doctrine, and enhanced interoperability across the force. Externally, the institutionalizing of pledges through multi-year budgets and binding compacts makes the Russian strategy of waiting out the West mathematically implausible.
You're building durability into the system, locking in commitments to survive policy swings and election cycles.
And that prepares us for the long term, the 3 to 10-year horizon, which aims for strategic normalcy.
So what does that look like?
By this point, Porcupine-Plus is a mature architecture. The defense industrial base is capable of maintaining a predictable replacement rate for high-consumption items. Infrastructure resilience is built into the national fabric-hardened energy grids, rapid repair capacity, protected transport hubs.
And automaticity is just business as usual.
It's fully routinized, verified, and functioning continuously. It transforms the nation into a permanently resilient, heavily defensible state that no aggressor would willingly confront.
So synthesizing this entire analysis, credibility is the problem, and the solution is precisely this engineered automaticity. The entire strategic blueprint is geared toward making the renewal of aggression predictably yield failure, cost, and frustration.
That is the military and strategic conclusion, grounded in a Christian realist understanding of the world. But we have to end with a return to the theological caution the sources offer.
The warning against geopolitical idolatry versus sovereign trust?
Yes. The sources identify a very real spiritual temptation when a nation searches for security in external relationships.
It's the warning we find in Isaiah 31:1.
Woe to those who go down to Egypt for help and rely on horses. There is a temptation, even while building the necessary porcupine structure, to elevate alliances, security compacts, or advanced weapon systems, the F-16s, the long-term compacts, to the status of a savior.
Trusting in the arm of flesh.
Seeking ultimate confidence in human instruments. And the sources are also sharp about the idol of alliances. Western security assistance, while strategically necessary, often comes with ideological strings attached. The liberal international order itself can demand allegiance to certain secular, humanistic, or progressive social agendas.
A nation risks selling its soul to purchase physical safety.
Trading the tyranny of a neighbor for the subtle moral demands of secular elites among its allies. The security guarantees have to be viewed strictly as transactional contracts for physical defense, not covenants of spiritual allegiance.
The true anchor, therefore, must remain in divine providence.
It must. Our Reformed tradition, specifically the Westminster Confession of Faith, Chapter 5, teaches that God directs and governs all things. The survival of any nation rests not on the cleverness of asymmetric warfare or the reliability of a 10-year contract,
but on the sovereign decree of the King of Kings.
The Porcupine strategy is a necessary secondary cause. It's the righteous instrument in the hand of the Almighty, but it is not the agent itself.
The essential balance of Christian realism, then, is fierce, responsible preparation of the hands for war. That's stewardship paired with total, humble surrender of the heart to providence.
We pursue the porcupine and the plus because it is a righteous duty to restrain evil, to bear the sword properly. But our hope, as the psalmist affirms in Psalm 20.7, must remain anchored exclusively in the name of the sovereign Lord.
Any security measure, no matter how expertly engineered, is ultimately fleeting if it displaces trust in the one true source of safety.
That's the balance.
Which leaves us with this final provocative thought for you, the listener. The pursuit of security guarantees must be stripped of its messianic pretensions. How do we ensure that while building the chariots and training the horses, while perfecting the strategy of denial and automaticity, our nation's hope remains anchored exclusively in the name of the sovereign Lord, refusing to let geopolitical necessity usurp the place of divine trust?